I'm going to cut to the chase and say this build took me a bit longer to finally click for me than most other builds I've played. That being said, it is definitely one of my favorite builds to run since you can carry the team if you are good enough mechanically, or if you are decent at planning ahead. The build today revolves around the FL Secured Perimeter Kit perk, more specifically the LS.7K Las Grid equipment. Before I even get into the why, let me explain what the perk does. The current in-game description reads, the ODDF mine will now be converted to the LS.7K Las Grid device. It will no longer detonate on trigger and will instead deal rapid damage to anomalies that are currently crossing the beam. To put it simply, it turns the ODDF mine equipment into a placeable laser that does 200 damage every half a second or so, depending on how the game is feeling that day. Then, the last line mentions it has a limited charge before it expires. Essentially, you just need to remember to replace them when you don't see a red laser on one of your mines. Also, keep in mind you can only have 6 of these active at a time. I will go into more detail on how to use them in the tips and advice section of the video. The next perk on this list is Steel Padding. I really like this perk since it is still saving me until this day when I make dumb mistakes. You can do without this if you believe that you won't make any fatal mistakes. Then there is Pinpoint. Essentially, it triples your damage for some weapons for 5 points, which is insane to think about. Since we are primarily going to be using the TAC-580 shotgun, this perk turns a 500 damage body shot into a 1500 damage body shot with an areate effect. It takes a little bit to get used to the timing, but it is definitely worth it since the best guns in the game are unfortunately high damage single shot weapons. The next perk is hWORLD. This is pretty mandatory sadly for reinforcements and anchor corruptions and later hazards. Nothing much else to say other than that. Then there is leg implants. I normally play this build as a roamer and a mid to frontliner, so not being slowed down is an amazing thing for 2 points. Also, can we please delete the Thornsworn modifier? This thing is absolutely stupid. Next up is the BL-Headhunter Gear, since we are actually utilizing everything in this perk. The highlighting of enemies is very nice to have, so you don't have to run into a horde you can't handle, and sort of see where the bosses spawn during a blackout event. Also gaining a 55% extra damage within the highlighting range, and always dealing the maximum amount of damage with firearms allows you to do respectable amounts of damage with things like the Blackout ILO, allowing you to take out mini bosses and bosses in a timely manner without the help of others. Then, the final icing on the cake is being immune to gas and disorientation, which makes Anchor Uncorrupting 80 times easier with this build. The final perk I use is Turn and River, since it helps recover any chip damage taken to our armor and health while synergizing with our specializations we will be picking in the next section. With that being said, our first specialization is Propagation. Since we are going to be using TAC restocks quite often, so the cooldown won't really matter as much, nor are we really using it for the slow directly. Our tier 2 specialization is going to be Acclimation, since it allows us to shotgun swap without using 2 skill points for Dexterous. And it makes using the launcher itself feel a lot smoother. The tier 3 specialization is going to be Enervation. This allows you and your team to have more time to actually breathe, since you can essentially just slow everything down that's not a boss by 65%. The uptime is fairly high if you are consistently being aggressive and pairs nicely with the next specialization. With our last spec being Annihilation, which allows us to essentially nuke anything that is a Hellwalker and below from existing in the place you shot the flare at. It easily triggers Enervation if shot into a horde and pairs nicely with our other perks and our skill deck like Turn and River, basically healing us to full if aimed well. For the starting loadout, I would recommend spare mags and any pistol you like. For the auxiliary, pick what you prefer here. I just use MTI due to the way I play. For the equipment, I highly recommend starting with 2 ODDF mines, so that you can have an easier time setting them up and replacing them. Then for the endgame loadout, a TAC-590 in the primary slot, A Blackout ILO or the Shellout is fine since they are meant for boss killing. The pistol doesn't really matter in this slot, so go nuts with that. For the melee, just run whatever you are comfortable with. I just use gauntlets to force myself to shoot instead of trying to rely on my melee. Then for the equipment, have ODDF mines, nano grenades for anchors, and the invo combat stem for bosses. And if you're using gauntlets, make sure to have a tomahawk. So how do you actually play this build? To answer that, you can fill an offensive and defensive role for your team. I usually get into the rhythm of doing the anchors and using my flares if I see a very annoying situation I don't want to deal with. Then I just go back to where my team is, which is usually at the shop, and just shoot things or reset up equipment until the next set of anchor deactivations. Keep in mind, you should always restock or wait for 2 visionary flares and higher hazards just to bail you out of a really bad situation. For bigger events like Hazard 40 and 80, I try to be the frontliner, slowing everything down in front so the anomalies have less of a chance of even touching my team. Just make sure to stay close to your team for Hazard 80 until the boss teleports. Although, sometimes things may just go wrong. I have always felt that I could handle most situations with this build due to having more than enough damage to deal with threats like bosses by yourself, and managing the horde with the copious amounts of explosions from your flare launcher and your Pinpoint TAC-590. You can even uncorrupt anchors by yourself on Hazard 60, as shown in this little test run I did on the Sarman Community College map, doing the harder anchors on purpose. It definitely is a bit trickier to uncorrupt anchors since they require a specific setup compared to just placing 2 spec cams or 2 turrets and just win consistently. This is the reason why I said the ODDF mines are important. Normally, how I would do anchors is flare as many things around the anchor as possible, then set up the 6 ODDF mines on the anchor. Keep in mind, you can only place ODDF mines on anchors that are not activated, meaning when the text is white. The game won't allow you to place mines if the text on the anchor is red. Also, make sure you space them so they don't delete each other. So back to Uncorrupting, when the mines are placed, I use the second flare to blow up everything around the anchor. Then, you could either nano grenade, then uncorrupt, or go straight into Uncorrupting. Sometimes you could just get unlucky and have a high HP anomaly cancel your Uncorrupting, so make sure to kill them and restock and try again. As you can see, Annihilation causes Enervation to happen, making everything around me slower, causing the anomalies to stay inside the las mines and nano grenade longer, meaning they are taking more damage to die. Just make sure to move around in a circle around the anchor when trying to uncorrupt to avoid any unnecessary damage and to damage anything with the lasers or the nano grenade. This is why we bring the Headhunter Gear to be immune to gas, because there is almost always gas on the anchors when we are doing this. For when there aren't any big events, I tend to place the ODDF mines in choke points that are likely to get kills, which is usually near the shop. But if I believe the shop to be covered, then I place them elsewhere. For higher hazards, I tend to put them on anchors that are really hard to uncorrupt without help, so I don't have to go through the hassle of setting them up later. This really applies to Hazard 100, where if you can, I highly recommend doing this before Hazard 100 starts, so that you or a teammate can do this anchor without wasting precious time setting up. I think that's all the tips and advice I wanted to give. If you want to ask any questions about me or the channel, or just want to give me a build to showcase, then comment on the video or the community post that will be posted shortly after. I plan to make a video on that if there are enough interesting questions or builds to look at. Anyways, thank you and see you later. Probably.